guys, welcome back to Serial at Midnight. My name is Heath Holland, and I am joined for a conversation about the Scarface Mob by Max Allan Collins. Max, welcome back to Serial at Midnight.
I love coming back here and seeing you, and we must be going to talk about the 1950s because you're in a bowling shirt.
Yeah, I'm all 50s up. We were talking before we hit record. I was like, nobody. This is why you're here to talk about the Scarface Mob. You are probably let's say the top five people walking this earth who know the most about Eliot Ness. You have done decades of research on Ness. He's popped up in fiction, and your nonfiction. And you have written the play, the Eliot Ness, The Untouchable Life. Well, I'm just telling people your resume. You can tell them your experiences with Ness.
Well, my big experience was being an 11-year-old kid tuning into Westinghouse Playhouse to see this thing called The Untouchables. And it wasn't called the Scarface Mob. Now we're looking at it on a beautiful Blu-ray,
Mm-hmm.
which is the motion picture version of it, which went out internationally and did play. I think it went out like in '59 internationally, and then did play in America around '62 as a movie called The Scarface Mob, with one titillating. That's kind of a pun. One titillating scene with Barbara Nichols that wasn't in the TV version, but it was presented in two parts, as you know, on Desilu Playhouse, and I don't think they had any idea what an explosion would happen. But it was one of those things that happened rarely in those days, because this is 1959, where the way it's structured, which you can pick up on when you watch the movie version, is that Capone doesn't show up till midway. And so it's Eliot Ness versus Al Capone, but the versus part, it basically is the cliffhanger. He shows up at the end of part one. And so you don't get so everybody had to wait a week to meet Al Capone. Historically, one of the things that's interesting about Al Capone is he had been he kind of evaporated from our culture because the Capone family was around, and they were litigious. And so when the movie, for example, the movie that really is the precursor to The Untouchables, Undercover Man, with Glenn Ford, which is a late '40s movie, and it was by the great Joseph H. Lewis. Gun crazy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get a better B movie crime guy than Joseph Lewis? So you got Glenn Ford playing a very Eliot Ness type figure, who is kind of an amalgam of real life IRS agents and Ness. And Capone is the villain of that, never mentioned by name. Never on screen other than his back and the hat. Never on screen. So this is the first time in 30 years, and of course 30 years ago doesn't seem that long ago to me now, but in '59, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre is 29. So all of a sudden, Al Capone comes roaring back into the popular culture, and there almost simultaneously there's a Rod Steiger movie where Rod Steiger plays Al Capone. There had been just a few months before a Playhouse 90 about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which became the source of the Roger Corman movie a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, this Prohibition era stuff is hitting the popular culture. And it hit it hardest with this Untouchables, in part because of that cliffhanger aspect of it. That's which Serial Midnight people understand the cliffhanger aspect, how that would kick in with people. And then you have this incredible performance by Robert Stack, this career best performance by Robert Stack, which he was just probably thought was a kind of a throwaway thing as a movie star who's, lowering himself to be on TV. And then you have Rod Steiger, and it's
Neville
this
Brand.
scary Neville
You
Brand.
talking about Neville Brand? Yeah.
Yeah, he's a formidable Al Capone, scary.
He is very scary. I just watched this with kind of back to back, may have even been back to back with the 10 Star. and Neville Brand is
Oh yeah.
he's got a very different role in that movie. So seeing that quiet menace in the 10 Star and then coming to this where it's a different kind of menace with that it's what you say where he's got this accent. He's like, it's gonna be me. I'm gonna be the one. And I'm like, ooh,
But
that's not accurate, is it?
no, anytime, no, he was Capone is a Brooklyn guy,
Yeah.
and now Nitti might have had it because Nitti was older than Capone. I mean, one of the fascinating things in real life, not to go down this rabbit hole too soon, is how young these people were in real life. Ness was like 26, and Capone in 29 in the around 1929, and because he's born around the turn of the century. And I would love to see somebody do this with them as young punks, the Young Guns
Hmm.
version of this. But of course, everybody looked like they were 45 years old in 1929
Yeah.
because of the suits and the hats and all of that kind of stuff. But you had this thing really explode in the culture. So you had kids like me, what they call water cooler talk now, where you go and what's going to happen next week? What's going to
Was
happen?
it playground talk back in the day?
Absolutely. And just there were a couple of things that hit like that. The Beverly Hillbillies, when it came on, people don't know how that
Really?
everybody was talking about that in schools.
The cement pond, you guys.
They'd never seen it. And then the next thing I would say was along those lines was the Beatles, which was, where it changed the culture entirely. But after the Untouchables came out, there was this spate of, movies about real life gangsters. We should probably go focus now on the movie a little bit because it is often dismissed as being just a bunch of hokum. That Ness got this undeserved reputation for somebody taking a lot of credit that he didn't deserve. This flowed from the TV show that followed, The Untouchables. And every week for a long time, they were doing real gangsters from all over the place, from New York, from, Ma Barker, who was one of the
Hmm.
outlaw gangs. And Ness was on the TV show, was getting credited for things he had nothing to do with.
Yeah.
Now, the poor guy was already dead. He wasn't taking credit himself. It was just what happened was this movie used up the book The Untouchables, Ness's memoir written with sports writer Oscar Fraley. And what is not really known about this, widely known about this, is how relatively accurate this movie is. I mean, almost all of this stuff happened. And because I did a lot of research on him for the novels, and then eventually the two massive books about Ness's life that Brad Schwartz and I did, that I'm very proud of. And I would just shout out to Brad Schwartz, who a young guy who got into this stuff, who was a Princeton graduate and a historian, and made me look like I didn't know how to research, to tell you the truth. And I'm
Wow.
a pretty good researcher. So those books are co-written by him. But one of the things we discovered was, unexpectedly, was how accurate the Untouchables book was. Now, what happened in the Untouchables book, which bled into the show, was that Fraley took a couple of short memoirs that he had Ness actually write, and one of which exists, and I've read, obviously, and took that and then took interview stuff that he had done with Ness, who we met in a bar. I mean, come on, how cool is that? I mean, Ness is sitting in a bar, probably half in the bag, and we got to hear about what I did with Al Capone. And this Fraley, this sports writer goes, "That's a pretty good story." So he nails Ness to do this project and records and writes down everything Ness has to say. But then when he does the book, he structured it as what would be best for story flow, for narrative flow. So a lot of things that happened to Ness when he was a prohibition agent before they started the Untouchables got into the book. So the book is very accurate. Let's say relatively accurate, surprisingly accurate, but it's all in the wrong order. It's all in whatever order played best in Fraley's mind as a narrative. Well, when they did the TV adaptation, the two-parter, they pretty much followed the book. So you have things like the one really dramatic scene, which is a great scene, where Robert Stack comes in and he's pretending to be a corrupt agent, and is going to hold them up for bribe money, and they're discussing in the background in Sicilian, should we just kill this guy? And then Keenan Wynn, who's wonderful in the Scarface Mob, he basically says they're deciding whether or not to kill you. You know, that happened, but it happened before the formation of the Untouchables. It was one of the things that happened in real life that led them to think this Ness guy is the guy we ought to put in charge. And so, it's full of that kind of thing. And then it also has Ness, who was a human being and flawed and you know, a little bit of a press hound, although not near as much as he's sometimes portrayed. He has a romance with a woman in this it's in the Scarface Mob, and she's quite good. Is it Patricia Crowley? Is that who plays her? But it's his third wife who he hadn't met yet. So his you know so Ness had Fraley put his current wife, because it was his third wife. Well, let's put my current wife in, probably, because if I don't put her in the book, she's probably going to be mad at me. That's the way I read it. So you have this weird reordering of events that makes the book seem, in retrospect, like, well, this isn't accurate. But if you look at every individual thing in the book, it really happened. And I can give you one really good example of this is when I did the little movie I did called Eliot Ness: An Untouchable Life, which was a one-man show with my late friend Michael Cornelison, who had played it in a play that I wrote. We were at the premiere in Rock Island, Illinois, and there were all kinds of people there. And a guy came up to me and said, you know, well, my dad was like a prohibition agent, and said a lot of that stuff was just exaggerated that Ness did. And we had been trying, Brad Schwartz and I had been trying to authenticate the parade of confiscated beer trucks that was run past Capone's hotel to freak Capone out, which is a great scene in the Scarface Mob. Capone flips out, and we hadn't been able to authenticate it. And we talking to this guy, and he said, well, you know, and it might have been his uncle he was talking about. I actually don't remember. But he had a relative who told him, oh, he didn't do all that stuff they're saying that he did. But he did tell him about the confiscated parade of vehicles. So we actually got it authenticated by somebody who was a Ness, kind of a Ness denier. Yeah, a Ness skeptic. And the reason why there were so many Ness skeptics around is that, again, this movie, which is I think, delightful, it's Phil Carlson. This is the guy that did the Phoenix City story. This is the guy that did Walking Tall. He knew his way around crime, you know, real life crime-based crime busters going into communities and cleaning them up. It was such a hit, this two-parter, on, you know, that almost immediately they said, well, let's make a TV show. So it was a backdoor pilot. It was not actually a pilot. And then they had to talk, you know, Stack into playing it. And if you go back and look at the, because there is a collection of the entire Untouchables series, early on, Stack isn't in every episode. or he will be just kind of like at the beginning, and then the ball will get passed to some other agent. And until that thing started really taking off, then they talked Stack into coming back and being center stage as Eliot Ness. And that's when they started him putting Ness up against all of these criminals he had nothing to do with. And that's how he got this latter-day reputation as a glory hound and like, well, but he didn't do it. He was dead. He died at his kitchen table,
Yeah.
Near a bottle of booze, I might mention. I might mention. The fact that Ness was almost absolutely positively an alcoholic and is the most famous prohibition agent of all time is just the kind of sweet irony that history will give us if we take the time to dig in a little bit.
You've talked before about the mythologizing of real people, and I know you're very close to Ness and you're very close to Wyatt Earp, and you've
But
talked about how those two real people create archetypes. Um,
and Capone, I think you got to put Capone in that because how many gangsters in popular culture have been based on the
yeah,
Capone
right.
model. Tony Soprano, even.
This whole premise of this video is sort of a fact versus fiction, I think, is we're looking at the story on screen and we're also looking at the reality of the people behind the story, the reality of
Right.
the Untouchables. And I know that you are not a huge fan of the Brian De Palma movie.
That was delicately put.
Yeah. There's actually a video on the channel that I've created from our previous conversation. Max Allan Collins turned down The Untouchables. And we can let people go watch that if they want to hear your words about that. But your problem with The Untouchables is that it is not historically accurate. It is not the truth. It is mythologizing in a way that is
Yeah.
irresponsible. What is, as a writer, what is the responsibility of a writer to tell the truth? Even the co-writer of the autobiography, the Ness
Yeah.
biography, is sweetening what really
Question.
happened.
No question. Well, as you know, my problem, first of all, I got to say, I'm a huge Brian De Palma fan. I'm a huge Brian De Palma fan. And when I turned down the novelization of The Untouchables, it was based on reading David Mamet's script, which I still think is a bad script, with some good things in it, some good speeches in it. And you could probably do, I should get you to do your Sean Connery to do the, the
Well, he's
face.
like, "What are you prepared to do?" And then there's like, they bring one of they, what is, what's the line? He's like, they put one of yours in the hospital,
Yeah.
you put one of theirs in the morgue.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
But he was so lazy. He was so lazy in writing it. He gave Ness a family that he didn't have. He had Ness throwing Frank Nitti off a building. I mean, I think you can build a really good case for anything like, let's say some of the Wyatt Earp movies, if they are like I love Gunfight at the OK Corral. All right, with the Burt Lancaster.
We should reference people to our top 5 westerns video
Yeah,
that we made, where you talk more about Gunfight at
Kirk
the OK
Douglas.
Corral.
Kirk Douglas. And but like Fraley, they are usually just moving pieces around,
Mhm.
or they're turning two of Wyatt Earp's brothers into one guy's. That's fair because God is a very imaginative storyteller, but a sloppy one. I mean, he does not give us the three-act structure very often in life, unless it's just like you're born, you walk around and you die, which is, I guess, the three-act
Spoilers.
structure. But but there was, when I see something historical that purports to be historical, and they're leaving stuff on the ground that they could have just bent over and picked up and used, and they're doing it out of laziness of not. First of all, look at the historical material. See what you have to fictionalize, what requires or benefits from fictionalizing. That's my argument. Don't have the Mounties chasing the Untouchables in Canada when liquor is legal in Canada. What are the Mounties? Why do the Mounties care if if legal I don't know, but you know what? It is a very entertaining movie, and De
I
Palma's a terrific filmmaker.
I've
So
come to terms. I've reconciled because that's the thing that brought me to the Untouchables. That was my introduction to the Untouchables, and so I have always had this really just I have just love it. But I've had to reconcile that it is also not the truth. It's a comic book movie, and that's kind of what we're talking about. Is that these characters, these real people, become characters. They become mythologized. I think that brings me back to talking about the Scarface mob, in that it is we do need to hammer. This is a very accurate version of the Eliot Ness story, and very entertaining. I mean, I gotta say, it
really
doesn't
good.
feel like I'm surprised you know because you know so much more about this than I do. I'm surprised that this is all mostly pulled from reality. Like the bad guys coming to his girlfriend's door and basically busting in and
Oh, I think that's probably hokum, but
okay. Okay.
it does parallel the fact that there were attempts on Ness's life. There were definitely there definitely was a hit out on him a couple of times, and the famous scene of the local ward healer coming and trying to bribe him, and him turning down incredibly huge money for the time,
Yeah.
just throwing the guy out, and the fact that there was a, you know, there's a thing in Scarface Mob about a Weasley little guy who's married to a stripper, and he wants to impress her, and so he plays both ends against the middle. It works for both Capone and for Ness. There's some basis in truth to that. I'm almost everything has the fact that the Keenan Wynn character. This is a spoiler alert, but Keenan Wynn does not make it to the end of the movie. Let's put it that way. That is based in reality. The fact that and the fact that a lot of people that cooperated with Ness ended up. One of the things about the Scarface mob is he's always telling people he'll protect them, and they're always winding up dead. Okay, but I think most of this stuff really did has a basis in fact. And I think you're going to make a myth out of it, but the myths have been enduring, I think, because at the heart of the Eliot Ness myth, at the heart of the Capone myth, at the heart of the Wyatt Earp myth, are real guys who did remarkable things, remarkable, dangerous things. And we can argue about the minutia of it. We can argue about, what they're, why they did it. I mean, obviously, Ness was a guy that didn't, he would take a drink. He was known for taking a drink.
Hmm.
He just saw the prohibition law as a door that organized crime went through, which it certainly was. That's turning that industry over to organized crime was not a good idea. Was not a good idea. So I think this movie, I think this TV show, movie, whatever you want to call it, really holds up, and I think this is a beautiful transfer. It
Yes,
looks great.
it does.
And now you want to talk a little bit about the bonus features?
I do, but let me ask you a question real quick before we move on from the movie. Do you remember there being a conversation when this hit television about the violence? Because I
Oh
know that,
yes,
okay.
big time. And there were two huge controversies. One was the violence, and they didn't really ever soften it much. They just kind of blew through it. It's
Hmm.
like, well, it's too bad, but the public likes it, so go spend your time on the editorial page and just say whatever you want to say. What they really got, and this is interesting, what they really had to do was back off on the use of real Italian gangsters, because and it was a Capone family was really behind a lot, and that's why again Capone drops out of the popular culture quite a bit, because they were afraid, they were litigious, and we don't think of them as real people, do we? I mean, we
No.
but they are. And if you were Al Capone's son and this stuff was on TV, you'd be pretty mad. And Neville Brand had excuse me about whatever Italian
Hmm.
accent he was butchering. So that was their family. So you can see that. You can see that they would, they would jump into the fray. And so he disappears out because he was huge in the culture for a while. I mean, the original movie Scarface, this is not about a guy from Cuba. I mean, it's basically Al Capone,
Yeah.
and it is really Al Capone, based on a book called Scarface.
Now
It's
you're not talking about the Al Pacino version. You're
oh,
talking about the original
talking about Paul Muni
Paul Moon. Yeah.
and the Howard Hawks directed film with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre basically in it, and
Hmm.
Boris Karloff as a gangster
That's a great
before he
movie. Yeah.
before he was the Frankenstein monster,
Hmm.
and it's still a pretty good movie. I mean, it's a good movie,
It's
but
very
they
good.
had censorship problems then too because they really wanted to. I think there's two or three endings of that to make it so there's nothing at all sympathetic about, so you don't feel bad about
Yeah.
Paul Muni dying.
You were talking about the special features before I derailed you. Let me put you back towards that.
Well, the one thing I don't really care for here is I'm not nuts about the two special features. There's some good material in them. They have a couple of British guys. I mean, I just feel like, oh, we're going to do a Henry VIII movie. Let's find a couple of guys from the Bronx to do the commentary. I
Yeah.
mean, this is a bad idea, and they also accepted the sort of this revisionist look at who Eliot Ness was, and also sometimes the revisionist look at who Al Capone was. There are a couple of books out there. There was a book I really disliked about Capone, where Ness was really dismissed and disrespected. And also Ken Burns, surprisingly, the Ken Burns Prohibition documentary is very inaccurate about Ness and very dismissive of Ness. And I now no longer trust Ken Burns documentaries.
Wow.
See, I don't. It's a funny thing when you're watching stuff that is based on reality. You just kind of take the ride, right?
Yes.
But when you come to something that you're kind of an expert on, that you've read a lot about, you go, "Whoa, that is really wrong," and then it really kind of taints the rest of it
Hmm.
for you. You can't take it seriously.
Yeah.
And so I do think the Scarface mob, yeah, it's hooked up to some degree. There were no shootouts. Eliot Ness was about, again, we should probably talk about the historical nature of, there was this famous two-pronged attack. They got Elmer Ire and Frank Wilson. The IRS was going to look at Capone and take him down for taxes. And then Ness was supposed to dry the city up as much as he could and distract Capone and do some gathering of evidence for the tax people, but you know, basically be the distraction and gather prohibition violations. And they had, I think, something like 1,000 violations against Capone that had been gathered by the Untouchables, who weren't really called the Untouchables until the newspapers did that late in the game. And actually, he didn't get much publicity till the trials came. And that's when the trials came, then Ness got all this publicity, and you see Untouchables in the headlines. There was talk of a Capone squad that did get into the papers at times, and some of the raids they did but this whole notion that all he did was bring in film crews and they shot all this stuff, that's way exaggerated. uh, so what happened, the Ness stuff was actually, the various prohibition violations kind of got lost in the shuffle. I think they brought them. I think they brought them to trial, but not much was done with them because by that time, prohibition was over. So how do you put somebody away on a bunch of prohibition charges when prohibition's already over? And whereas the tax laws were right there, and that they used the tax laws to put him away. And there was a deal made, and this is, I think this is in the Scarface Mob, where Capone is expecting to get a slap on the wrist, and instead, and has made a deal, and then instead gets 11 years,
Hmm.
which may not sound like much, but it really was a death sentence for him, essentially,
Yeah.
because he had syphilis very, very, very bad, and it ate his brain up eventually. One of the fun ironies to me about Ness is that when he went on to be the public safety director of Cleveland, after that he became basically America's top cop on military bases and so on, and he was fighting VD on military bases and fighting VD on you know war related industry. So Capone and Ness were fighting VD simultaneously, each in their own way. And I know you can't make this stuff up.
No.
And Ness was really very much a crime fighter, a crime buster in Cleveland in the 30s,
Hmm.
post Chicago. So that he did go on to continue to be kind of a gangbuster. He sometimes gets a black eye because he supposedly did not. A lot of people say he did not get the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, who was a major serial killer operating in Cleveland. But according to to his notes and his papers and so on, he basically did a deal with the family, the rich family of the butcher, to put him away in a mental institution. But he couldn't get credit. He couldn't get credit for it. He couldn't be public about the fact that he cracked that case as well. It's all in a book called. It's all in a book. I just happen to have this book here by Brad Schwartz and myself called Eliot Ness and the Mad Butcher. So just coincidentally, I just happen.
And the other one, you got the other one handy too.
I
I mean,
do
I'll
have
have put.
this is how much there is to learn about this
That's
actual
right.
story. Scarface and the Untouchables and the Untouchable. Uh,
See, this is why when this was first announced, I emailed you and I was like, "Did you know about this?" And you were like, "No." And I was like, "Why aren't you on this? You should have been the very first person that they came to do a commentary or to do a contribute an essay on it or something. Even there's a booklet here. You're a writer. What in the world, man? What's going on?"
or my collaborator Brad Schwartz, who also knows it, and he knows. I'm not the expert that he was, and I probably have said some inaccurate things in this piece today. But Heath, the longer you keep the plane in the air, the more luggage you got to throw out.
Yeah.
Some of the luggage is gone. Uh, but but a couple. Let me just tell a couple of kind of anecdotes about me and Eliot Ness.
Oh yeah.
One is, as I think you know, the first big break in my career was I got to do the script for the Dick Tracy comic strip, starting in 1977 and up until 1993, when they fired me. But that's a whole.
But the first person to work on that after Chester Gould, right?
And I knew Gould. I knew Gould well, and we were friends. And I stayed at his home many times. And I asked him, flat out asked him, well, where did you get the idea for Dick Tracy? Well, it was this handful of honest agents in Chicago at that time, and that were getting some good publicity about bringing Capone down. I said, "Are you talking about Eliot Ness?" "Yes, I am." And I'm like, "So you're saying Dick Tracy was based on Eliot Ness?" "I guess you could say that." And I'm like, this is kind of a major pop cultural discovery that he's just tossing off because he was focused on he was focused on that.
Well,
By the way,
especially when you
by the way,
consider that.
we
Go
we've
ahead.
we've got VCI, who I do some work with, and you do
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
I just did commentaries for the four Dick Tracy movies that were done in the mid '40s that are coming out on Blu-ray for the first time.
Now you've done DVD stuff before for the Dick Tracy films. This is the Blu-ray version.
Well,
New.
what's funny about it is I had done I'd done the first movie and the third movie back in like 2000, 1998, which now seems to be a long time ago.
Yeah.
And now I'm coming in 2024 and do two more. So you get my two 1998 commentaries and my two 2024 commentaries, and some of my opinions have changed, as opinions are wont to do when you.
Let's hope that they do.
Yeah.
Opinions should change. Yeah.
But I still think those are cool movies, and that they're out on DVD or out on Blu-ray soon. I think is a very, very cool thing.
Well,
So
it's just interesting to me that the Untouchables is kind of criticized. The Untouchables TV series is kind of criticized as being Dick Tracy because he's going after all these criminals, and then you find out the history that Dick Tracy is actually based on Eliot Ness.
and then Chet was kind of irritated that they did this Untouchables TV show that was so much like Dick Tracy. As women's into the telescope, that's what was going on. I'm writing my book True Detective about my detective character Nathan Heller, and I should mention that we're doing True Noir, which is this 10-episode full immersive audio drama with our mutual friend Rob Burnett, who is the director, and that's in production now. I'm halfway through the 10 scripts. So this is a series I've done since it first came out in 1983 about this character, Nathan Heller, fictional character who's involved in real crimes. Everybody else is real in the books but him. So it's the Back Dahlia case, it's, Huey Long's assassination and everything. When I did the first one, which was a book called True Detective, now I'd like to sue HBO for using True Detective, but I can't. But when I did True Detective, one of the things I was thinking going into it was, boy, I wish Ness were still around in Chicago at this time. This was 1932, because there was an incident, a dramatic incident, assassination attempt on the life of Frank Nitti. Wouldn't it be perfect to have Eliot Ness? But I know he's gone by then. He was out of Chicago by then. And some of the books indicated, the quote unquote nonfiction books, said that he was out of Chicago at that point. So I did, and I really thought it'd be perfect because my camera has his Pat Chambers, his all the private eyes have their police contact, right? That can give them information so they don't actually have to do the work, and also so that you can have the law enforcement against vengeance thing happening. So I start digging into the newspapers, and showing up at the scene of the attempted assassination of Frank Nitti is Eliot Ness. He's still there. So then he becomes basically the Pat Chambers to Nate Heller's Mike Hammer, sometimes the Jiminy Cricket to Nate Heller, because Nate Heller is a little shady, and of course Ness represents the straight and narrow path. And so he's in probably a third of the books. And when these books first hit and they were attracting some attention, I was asked by Bantam Books to do a series about Ness. So I ended up doing 4 novels about Eliot Ness in Cleveland, all based on real cases that Ness worked on, one of which was the Butcher, the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Butcher's Dozen. The first book-length work on that case. And so my researcher and I, George Hagenauer, who had Cleveland relatives, we went to the Cleveland, the Historical Society there, and to research that period in Cleveland. And so when I was going through the card catalog, there's this thing that said, Eliot Ness scrapbook. Well, that's interesting. So I said, could you bring this up? It's in the basement. They're going to bring it up. And it was kind of toward the end of the day. And I'm like, well, it was like 45 minutes later. And where's the scrapbook? How hard is it to bring a scrapbook? I mean, just bring me a little scrapbook. This guy comes with a cart, a library cart with like 6 gigantic scrapbooks, and the scrapbooks are a size that you could paste a front page in of that era. And now it's like 5 o'clock and they're closing up, and I'm staring, I'm staring at all these, and I said, "Could I come back tomorrow? And could you just?" And so, at any rate, I went through all these scrapbooks, and it was Ness's personal scrapbooks of all of his clippings. And this is largely what my research has been based on. And nobody knew these. The last person who had seen them apparently was Oscar Fraley when he was working on his Cleveland book. He did a little paperback on the Cleveland years. And so that was the basis of the Cleveland books I did on him. And then eventually, and then Brad Schwartz dug out so much more than I did. But that was the backbone of all my research. And so this has been a really interesting ride for me. I based my Quarry character. Quarry is a hitman. There was a Cinemax show based on my Quarry novels. I based him largely on, well, a friend of mine who came back damaged with from Vietnam, post-traumatic stress syndrome, but we didn't have a name for it when he first came back, and Audie Murphy, who's somebody you and I have talked about a lot. Robert Stack said that he based his portrayal of Eliot Ness in part on Audie Murphy.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
So when I see these interests of mine converging,
Mm-hmm.
Dick Tracy, because I got the Dick Tracy strip basically because I was this huge knowledgeable fan about Dick Tracy, who was also had a few mystery novels published. So I got Dick Tracy, Eliot Ness, The Untouchables,
Audie Murphy.
Audie Murphy, Wyatt Earp. I mean, and it's fascinating to see how these things converge and feed each other. And people argue about the revisionist history and so on. So I'm glad that you gave me this opportunity to talk about this, because this is obviously an area of mine that is very close to my, to my slightly damaged heart.
Yeah. You are the single person I think who's best suited to talk about this because of your research, because of your love for not just the truth, but also the love of this movie that we're talking about. I think this is a great jumping off point for people who want to know more about the reality or just more stories about Ness to dig into your work, and you've given us a lot to enjoy. I gotta ask this because Wyatt Earp's come up multiple times in this conversation. Do you have any aspirations to give the treatment you've given to Ness to Wyatt Earp?
Well, I did one book which you may know called Black Hats,
Mm-hmm.
which is about in which old Wyatt Earp meets young Al Capone, and it's still in print. So feel free to hit
That
Amazon.
needs to be a movie. Why is Hollywood? There's your movie right there.
Yeah, and it was optioned for a while, and it was going to be, and it just makes me cry to think that it didn't, it never happened. But Han Solo himself was going to play Wyatt Earp.
Are you kidding? Harrison Ford was going to play Wyatt Earp?
Yeah, you can on the internet you can find him talking about it in those. But the thing about being a writer of source material, shall we say,
Yeah.
I am so lucky to have had Road to Perdition. By the way, Eliot Ness is in the graphic novel Road to Perdition, but he didn't make it the cut into the movie. But to have a movie like Road to Perdition made, to have a quality TV show like Quarry made, and then I've also been blessed to be able to do regional filmmaking myself, because it's hard for me here in Iowa to get anybody to pay attention to me in Hollywood. When they bought Road to Perdition, I said, "Is there any possibility I could take a run at the script?" It was a long silence. I am in the WGA, but I'm not the first person they're going to think of. So I think I've done at this point six independent films. with budgets ranging from $10,000 to
Hmm.
half a million, uh, more often in the $15,000 range. And I'm hoping you'll let me come back on sometime uh, when we get close to Christmas season to talk about my Blue Christmas movie,
Absolutely.
which I'm very, very, very proud of. And VCI, there they are, and
Hmm.
MVD are bringing it out together jointly. And and it's a private eye story set in 1941. So that's just where I
Hmm.
live. I'm
Yeah.
afraid.
Nobody's better at it than you are.
Well,
Keep doing it.
that's very kind of you to say. If love for the genre counts, then maybe you're right, because I do love the noir genre, which I still think of as hard boiled. And we've gone this entire interview without talking about Mickey Spillane at all, which is pretty interesting.
Everybody that's watching the video version of this can see the Spillane book right there to your left.
We should do a show on that whole experience, but I am coming down to the end of a process of I'm going to be doing the last of the posthumous Mike Hammer novels very soon. I think there's going to have been 13 of them. These are books that Mickey had in progress in one stage or another at his death. And he and I were very good friends. He is someone I idolized and managed to get close to. And just and it's one of the I've been so blessed because I Dick Tracy was my favorite comic strip as a kid. I'm a comics guy. And I got to write it for 15 years. And I got to know Chester Gould. I got to meet and collaborate with and be friends with and have my son be the godson of Mickey Spillane, my other big hero. I mean, if I were not me, I'd hate me. I would definitely hate me. And the other thing that's been great is that most people that become big fans of something and get kind of absorbed by the person, the writer, the filmmaker that they admire, I've been able to have my own separate career from continuing these things.
Hmm.
But I have my Nate Heller. I have my now we have True Noir in process, and I think that's going to be fabulous because and Eliot Ness is in it. Eliot Ness is in it, and we have a bunch of well-known. They're not A-list guys, I guess you'd say, but these are because we require character actors for
Hmm.
this story. And actually, it's a story that was done. I hadn't even thought of this. It was the story is of the assassination of Chicago Mayor Cermak, which was a two-parter on the Untouchables.
Wow.
Not terribly accurate two-parter on the
Yeah.
Untouchables, but so I've been very, very lucky to be able to. I mean, frankly, they pay me to do my hobby. I'm not getting to be an age where it's tricky. And one of the reasons why I am back really working on some regional filmmaking is I can control these in a way that someone who is my age can do and still accomplish something.
Mm.
As you know, Blue Christmas was done basically on one set.
Yeah.
We are preparing to do, I have a series that I do with my wife, Barb, about antiquing. It's a cozy mystery series, the Trash and Treasures series, and she and I, and so we're doing a Trash and Treasures movie, and it all takes place in a theater. So I'm in one location, so I can really control it. I can make it small but good. That's my idea now, small but good. And I have a horror movie that I want to do that takes place in a house, one house. Okay, and so I can, this is not me running around. Now I do have a script for Road to Purgatory, the sequel to Road to Perdition. It will probably kill me if I get to do it, but what a way to go.
Well, listen, people watch this channel. People are watching this conversation. So producers, Hollywood producers, let's make this stuff happen. Road to Perdition is one of the greatest movies of the last, when was that? It was around the millennium, right? 2001, I want to say.
It's always showing up in the best 25 gangster movies.
It is an incredible film, and it's based on incredible source material. But I'm talking about movies. I'm trying to pitch this to a producer right now. Like, guys, this is money, right? Let's make this happen. Hire this man to write your and let him write the screenplay for crying out loud. How many chart toppers and how many accolades does this man have to earn before you give him the reins for your Hollywood film? It is about time. Make it happen. This has been incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge about Eliot Ness with me and with the audience. And I want to encourage the audience. There's been a lot of book mentions here, a lot of references. I've popped up covers for books. There's also, I'll put links in the description of this episode too, but there's also a playlist right here on my channel with Max Allan Collins. So it's everything that we've done together is collected in one playlist, and I highly encourage you to go check those videos out because getting to collaborate with Max on a regular basis now has been an absolute thrill for me. And we've had some incredible conversations about our favorite noir films, our favorite westerns. We did a whole sort of overview about your career, which is you can't even begin to touch your career because it's been so prolific for so long. But we tried. We tried. I think we talked for about 2 hours and covered a lot of stuff. But there's a lot of what I'm saying is like there's a lot more to discover with Max here on the channel. Go check those videos out and let's just support Max. For you coming here to talk to me about this it's a treat, it's a privilege, and I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to do it.
Well, Heath, I'm a fan. I was watching you long before, we got to know each other.
Yeah.
I'm very, there are two or three people on YouTube who I think are absolutely outstanding. I've mentioned Rob Burnett, and I'm mentioning you right now. And there's a lot of people that are just like some goofus sitting in his office, and you're the real deal. You're the real deal, and I appreciate the fact that we're going to try to talk maybe once a month or so.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna make this a regular feature.
And look at noir, look at westerns. We can do science fiction too,
Oh yeah.
and horror. Because these are all interests of mine. All of these genres, and it's I think one of the things that we do. If you go to look at what we did on noir, and what we did on westerns, we aren't necessarily doing what everybody else is doing. The predictable top five or top 10 are not what we're doing.
Right.
First of all, our tastes are too quirky to do that. And second of all, I think we want to bring people to things they may not have thought about looking at.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for having me.